What if the greatest threat to your potential wasn't your lack of talent, your circumstances, or your intelligence, but the institution you spent your entire childhood inside? From the moment a child steps into a classroom, something subtle begins, not education, but conditioning. The modern school system doesn't ask who you are, what inspires you, or what your mind is capable of. It only asks whether you can sit still, memorize information, and comply. Most people never question this because they survived it. But survival and growth are not the same thing. The first lesson school teaches isn't math or science, it's obedience. Raise your hand to speak. Don't question the teacher. Don't step outside the curriculum. Genius doesn't grow here. It gets standardized, packaged, and processed like a product. And deep inside, you always sensed something was wrong. You felt bored, disconnected, and misunderstood. You blamed yourself. But the problem was never you. It was the system's design. And if schools aren't designed to nurture potential, then what exactly are they built to produce? Have you ever wondered why schools feel more like factories than places of discovery? Because that's exactly what they were modeled after. During the Industrial Revolution, the blueprint was simple. Bells to control your schedule, desks arranged like assembly lines, a supervisor at the front, standardized output measured by tests. Schools were never intended to unlock brilliance. They were built to produce compliant citizens, predictable, manageable, replaceable. Independent thinkers can't be controlled, and you can't maintain a system if everyone questions its foundations. Children are naturally curious, creative, chaotic, and eager to explore. But the system doesn't reward curiosity, it suppresses it. It trims wild minds into straight lines. And the tragedy is that you begin to accept this as normal. But if the system is suppressing genius, then there must be a deeper mechanism responsible, one that transforms intelligence into conformity. Why do some of the smartest people you know still feel average, insecure, or lost? Because school turns intelligence from a personal journey into a competition. Students are ranked, compared, and sorted like mass-produced objects. Intelligence becomes something measured, not something expressed. You stop learning out of curiosity and start learning out of fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of disappointing someone. Your mind becomes dependent on approval. Failure becomes terrifying instead of educational. And this is how schools kill genius, not by removing intelligence, but by redefining it. Real genius isn't the ability to repeat information. It's independence. It's seeing patterns others miss. It's questioning assumptions. But the traits that build innovators, artists, leaders, and inventors are punished early. A student who questions is disruptive. A student who learns differently is behind. A student who dreams too wildly is unrealistic. The very qualities needed to change the world are the first ones the system silences. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to silence yourself. What if you're no longer imprisoned by the system, but by the voice the system implanted inside your mind? Children who learn that mistakes are punished stop experimenting. They stop taking risks. They stop dreaming. They build an internal supervisor, a mental teacher who whispers, "Don't be wrong. Don't stand out. Don't try something unfamiliar." Genius requires failure. Creativity requires experimentation. But a mind conditioned to fear mistakes can never innovate. The system doesn't need to hold you forever. It only needs to train you long enough that you continue the job yourself. This is why adults hesitate to take risks, avoid new paths, follow orders, and fear uncertainty. They were taught to fear the discomfort that genius requires. And despite all this, society celebrates school. Why? Because we've been trained to confuse schooling with learning. People assume that if something is universal, it must be right. But ubiquity is not proof of effectiveness, only proof of power. Real education is self-driven, curiosity-fueled, and individually paced. School is the opposite. We confuse memorization with intelligence, compliance with discipline, grades with worth. And in doing so, we raise generations who know facts but don't know themselves. This chapter ends here, but the journey doesn't. If schools are the problem, what happens to the minds that refuse to be standardized? What if the subjects you are forced to learn weren't designed to expand your mind, but to limit your perception of what's possible? Think back to your school years. How many things you memorized still matter? How many shaped your identity, your dreams, your path? Most people don't remember formulas, historical dates, or classifications. But they remember the feeling of being judged. They remember being compared, corrected, or dismissed. That's the real curriculum, not the material, but the message beneath it. Don't pursue what you love. Pursue what is assigned. Your value is measured in numbers someone else defines. Your worth depends on how closely you conform. The genius of a system lies not in what it teaches, but in what it prevents you from becoming. And once you see this clearly, one question becomes unavoidable. Who benefits from a population trained not to think independently? If genius is so powerful, why would any system want less of it? Because genius is unpredictable. Genius questions authority. Genius breaks rules. You can't run a controlled society with millions of independent thinkers. The school system wasn't built around human potential. It was built around economic necessity. Its real job is to manufacture employees, not innovators. Followers, not leaders. Specialists, not thinkers. Reactors, not creators. A genius doesn't wait for permission. A genius challenges the foundation of the world they're born into. But a society built on routine and hierarchy can't afford minds like that. So school trains you into a predefined role. You don't learn what you need for life. You learn what the economy needs from you. The subjects that would actually free you: creativity, financial literacy, negotiation, emotional intelligence, are absent. A free mind is inconvenient. A self-taught thinker is uncontrollable. And in this, the system reveals its true purpose, not to develop your intelligence, but to direct it. But the deepest wound of the system isn't academic or economic, it's psychological. Children are born scientists. They are explorers by nature. They touch everything, break everything, question everything. But curiosity is a liability in a rigid system. A curious child disrupts the schedule. Curiosity leads off script. So instead of being rewarded, curiosity is quietly extinguished. Stay on task. Don't deviate. Follow the instructions. Ask only the questions that are already in the book. What happens when you spend 12 years being told not to explore? You stop exploring. Adults don't lose curiosity because they grow older. They lose it because it was conditioned out of them. Now, when faced with something new, they feel fear instead of fascination. They think learning is tedious, not thrilling. They doubt their own intelligence, not because they lack ability, but because they were trained to distrust their own minds. And in this realization, something painful becomes clear. Your boredom wasn't a flaw, it was a rebellion. But if curiosity dies, something even more dangerous grows in its place: the addiction to approval. Why do most people not know what they want, only what they're praised for? School teaches you early on that your worth comes from external validation. Grades become proof of your value. Approval becomes oxygen. Correct answers matter more than meaningful questions. You stop learning for yourself and start learning to please others. And once that habit forms, it follows you into adulthood. People fear criticism because they were taught that mistakes are unacceptable. They avoid risks because they were conditioned to seek safety. They hesitate to create because creativity is unpredictable and ungraded. A person addicted to approval becomes easy to control. They don't think they comply. They don't choose, they wait. They become skilled at following instructions, but incapable of writing their own. And this leads to the final illusion, the myth of the one-dimensional mind. The school system pretends that intelligence is narrow, linear, and measurable. But genius comes in many forms. Creative intelligence, emotional intelligence, spatial intelligence, artistic intelligence, strategic intelligence. The school system recognizes almost none of them. A child who can imagine entire worlds is ignored. A child who can read people intuitively is overlooked. A child who sees patterns instantly is misunderstood. Because the system doesn't destroy genius out of malice. It destroys genius because it cannot measure it. And what it cannot measure, it declares worthless. This chapter reveals a system built not to elevate you, but to contain you. But what happens to the minds that slip through the cracks? The ones who refuse to be standardized? Some collapse. Some conform, but some begin to awaken. What if the greatest genius of your generation never changed the world? Not because they lacked brilliance, but because school convinced them they didn't have any. This is the silent tragedy almost no one talks about. Every classroom contains children who think differently, who see what others can't, who imagine new possibilities. But instead of being recognized, these minds are mislabeled, distracted, difficult, unfocused, disruptive. Their gifts don't die dramatically. They fade quietly, not through rejection, but through misdirection. They stop reaching for the extraordinary because the system never pointed them toward it. Their potential doesn't collapse, it gets rerouted into anonymity. And many of these hidden geniuses never realize what they could have been, simply because the system never allowed them to find out. But genius isn't just ignored, it's punished. If school were truly about learning, why does it respond so harshly to anyone who thinks differently? Systems fear what they cannot control. Original thinkers break patterns, question assumptions, and create ideas that don't fit into boxes. History proves this. Einstein was dismissed as a poor student. Tesla was seen as eccentric and troublesome. Da Vinci was considered difficult to teach. Their minds didn't fit the mold, so the mold treated them as defects. School doesn't reward originality. It penalizes it. It values repetition over reinvention. It praises compliance and punishes curiosity. The student who challenges the teacher is labeled problematic. The one who learns differently is called slow. The one who dreams wildly is told to be realistic. When you punish a child for thinking independently, they stop sharing their thoughts. Soon, they stop having them at all. And that's the true damage, not the suppression of behavior, but the suppression of identity. This is why so many adults don't know who they are. Why so many feel lost, unfulfilled, disconnected from anything meaningful. When your entire childhood is spent performing for approval, you never learn what actually moves you. You never learn what excites you, what inspires you, what your mind was built for. You grow up chasing grades, then jobs, then promotions, never passion, never purpose. You wake up one day realizing that the life you're living isn't one you chose. It's one you were conditioned to accept. You confuse stability with meaning, productivity with purpose, routine with identity. This is the root of the midlife crisis, not that people suddenly change, but that the illusion finally cracks. They meet a version of themselves they never had the chance to become. And the emptiness they feel isn't failure. It's the ghost of a genius they were never allowed to explore. But the tragedy doesn't stop with individuals. A system that destroys genius doesn't just weaken people, it weakens the entire world. Imagine how many breakthroughs never happened. How many inventions, artworks, philosophies, and revolutions died in childhood classrooms. For every Einstein who persisted, how many never made it out? For every Jobs who rebelled, how many complied until their curiosity withered? Humanity progresses through extraordinary minds, yet our system is designed to produce ordinary ones. Every time a child is shamed for thinking differently, a future scientist disappears. Every time imagination is mocked, a future artist fades. Every time curiosity is punished, a future innovator dies. The greatest losses in human history aren't the wars we fought or the disasters we faced. They are the ideas that were never born. And yet, something new is happening. Something the system never prepared for. A generation is rising that refuses to accept the identity school tried to impose on them. The internet has become the great equalizer, a place where misfits, autodidacts, and unconventional thinkers thrive. People are teaching themselves skills that universities don't offer. Building businesses without degrees. Creating art without permission. Innovating without institutions. These self-taught minds are the rebels the system failed to suppress. They stopped waiting for validation. They stopped apologizing for thinking differently. They stopped believing they were broken simply because they didn't fit the mold. And now they're rewriting the rules. For the first time in history, genius doesn't need a classroom. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need approval. All it needs is curiosity, autonomy, and the courage to trust itself. The system may have destroyed millions of potential geniuses, but it also created something more powerful, a generation that sees through the illusion. And once you see the illusion, you can't go back. Once you realize you were never broken, you stop trying to fix yourself. You start rebuilding yourself. And when a mind begins to rebuild itself, the system loses its power forever.
If the door to the prison is unlocked, wide open even, why don't people leave? Why do they complain about their lives, fantasize about change, whisper dreams in the dark, yet wake up every morning to the same routine, the same choices, the same cage? Simple. Freedom is terrifying. People aren't trapped because they're weak. They're trapped because true freedom demands something the cage never requires: responsibility, uncertainty, identity death, rebirth. The world has convinced people that freedom is exhilarating. In reality, freedom begins with a collapse, a dismantling of everything familiar. And most people would rather stay comfortable in a nightmare than risk waking up in an unknown reality. Everyone loves the idea of freedom. Few can withstand its consequences. Freedom means no excuses, no shortcuts, no one to blame. When you're free, failure is yours. Success is yours. Choices are yours. There's no system to lean on, no narrative to hide behind, no tribe to validate you. Are you sure you want freedom or just comfort disguised as choice? Most people mistake comfort for happiness. They think ease equals safety. But comfort slowly kills the part of you that could have become extraordinary. It numbs the hunger, softens the will, and wraps your potential in silk-lined chains. Freedom threatens safety, and safety feels holy to the average mind. That's why people don't fear chains, they fear open gates. Control feels good, even when someone else has it. People love routines, rules, and predictable outcomes because they make life easy to navigate. The system doesn't force control onto people, they ask for it. Structure gives them identity, rules give them direction, narratives give them meaning. Without these, most people would drown in existential anxiety. Why do people cling to their chains even when the door is open? The truth is brutal. People don't want to think. They want to be told what's true. They want certainty more than truth. They want approval more than authenticity. The cage may limit them, but it also relieves them from responsibility. It's easier to be trapped with instructions than free with choices. Control isn't the enemy. People's dependence on it is. Modern culture worships individuality. Everyone wants to be unique, yet everyone behaves the same way. They wear the same trends, repeat the same slogans, chase the same life, and believe that customizing the wallpaper of their cage makes them different. If everyone is different the same way, Is anyone truly different? Individuality has been commodified. People don't discover who they are. They shop for identities. They adopt labels like fashion accessories, mistaking categories for character. They don't ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "Which version of myself is socially accepted?" True individuality is dangerous because it means standing alone with no script, no applause, no guarantees. Fake individuality? The system gladly sells you that. Human beings evolved to survive in groups. Standing alone once meant death. Today, it means something far deeper: social exile, ridicule, misunderstanding. And so the mind interprets independence as a threat. If thinking for yourself costs you your tribe, will you still pay the price? That fear keeps people aligned, not because they don't dream of leaving their mental cages, but because the moment they step out, they lose belonging. And belonging feels like oxygen to the unawakened mind. People don't stay trapped because they lack opportunities. They stay because freedom requires solitude, courage, and self-authorship. And most people would rather be accepted than awake. Freedom is lonely at first. That's why almost nobody takes it.
Freedom isn't a place you arrive at. It's a state you construct, brick by brick, decision by decision, awareness by awareness. You don't escape the illusion of freedom by running from society. You escape it by reclaiming authorship of your own mind. Most people never do this because they're waiting for someone to liberate them. They want a leader, a movement, a miracle, but no one is coming. If someone could grant you freedom, they could also take it away. True freedom isn't given. True freedom is built. The first step isn't action, it's realization. You cannot escape a prison you don't know you're in. Awareness is the mental earthquake that destabilizes the illusion. You can't escape a prison you don't know you're in. Start by questioning the origins of your beliefs, your desires, your fears. Ask yourself, did I choose this, or was I conditioned to want it? Do my goals excite me, or were they assigned to me? Is this my path, or just the path of least resistance? Awareness breaks the spell. Once you see the bars, you can no longer pretend they're windows. Awareness hurts. It dissolves the comfort of ignorance. But that pain is the beginning of liberation. Most people don't live, they operate. They react, comply, imitate. They run on scripts downloaded from culture. Their lives are predictable because their minds are predictable. Freedom begins where autopilot ends. What would your life look like if you stopped running on default? To reclaim your mind, interrupt patterns. Say no when you're expected to say yes. Choose the hard path when the easy one calls. Do something meaningful instead of something comfortable. Every act of conscious choice weakens the spell of conditioning. Every moment of awareness restores sovereignty. The system fears independent thinkers because independent thinkers don't require shepherds. Once you stop living automatically, the world changes, not because the world changed, but because you did. The goal isn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion, it's mastery. A free mind isn't oppositional, it's self-directed. True freedom isn't given, it's built. A mind that can't be owned thinks slowly in a fast world, questions before it accepts, observes before it reacts, creates more than it consumes, chooses discomfort over sedation, values truth over approval. This kind of mind cannot be manipulated. Algorithms lose power, narratives lose grip, fear loses influence. Once you know how to think, not what to think, you become dangerous. Not to others, but to the systems that rely on unconscious compliance. A sovereign mind doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't outsource identity. It doesn't need validation to exist. It decides, it creates, it leads. Freedom is not an event, it's a daily choice. A choice to confront fear instead of obey it, to question narratives instead of adopting them, to define your values instead of inheriting them. Freedom doesn't require permission, just courage. You will lose things: comfort, certainty, approval. The false versions of yourself that once kept you safe. That's the price. The people who never become free aren't lacking intelligence, they're unwilling to pay that cost. You do not escape the system by beating it. You escape it by no longer needing it. And once you detach from its illusions, from its definitions of success, identity, worth, the cage dissolves. Not because it wasn't real, but because it never owned you. Freedom isn't defined by laws, governments, or society. It begins in the only place that has ever mattered: your mind. You now understand. The cage is cultural conditioning. The guards are comfort and fear. The chains are inherited identities. The prison is invisible and internal. The escape? Awareness, intention, courage, thought. Most people never take that journey because they don't trust themselves enough to lead their own lives. But once you do, once you see through the illusion, there is no return. You don't become free when the world changes. You become free when you do. The question now isn't whether the prison exists. The question is, will you walk out?